Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right, gym bros, it's Big Paul here today. We're going to talk about the cutting and bulking controversy. Is cutting and bulking dead? Bulking and cutting, whatever the fuck you want to call it. There's been a lot of controversy lately about cutting and bulking. Several people talking about how it's dead. It's a waste of time. I just had Scientific Snitch on earlier this week, Ella. She was fantastic, and she talked about her takes on it. Got all the bros in the broverse butt hurt. I'm going to explain to you in just 1 minute about my take on bulking and cutting and why I do still think it has application. I haven't really changed my thoughts on it. I don't know why people think suddenly I've changed my mind on it, and I'm going to talk about it from my perspective and how Ella's thoughts, Scientific Snitch, plays into what I've been talking about for years and having my clients to do and how it works. I'm going to talk to you guys about that and explain my thought process on bulking and cutting and how to get big, huge, and stay lean at the same time. Before we get into all that, I want to let everybody know that I do have a Black Friday sale going on for the Science of Anabolics and Performance Enhancing Drugs e-course. It is the best e-course out there that Kurt Havens and I have put together. It has over 100 modules and 60 or so hours of content. We're actually doing a live Q&A on Friday, which would be today when this video releases, at 11 a.m. Eastern Time if you want to join that. But we have a 30% off sale on the e-course right now through Monday. This is the biggest sale I'll have for the entire year, so if you want to pick it up, now's the time to do it. You're going to get it the cheapest that you can possibly get it right now. The code is Black Friday. There is a link to it in the video description below. Go grab it while you can at that deep discount. And enough of that. Let's get into bulking and cutting and my thoughts on bulking and cutting in just 1 second. All right, so I put a bunch of slides together to kind of keep my thoughts coherent on this. I have a lot of thoughts about bulking and cutting, and these are just sort of my notes I'm going to share with you so you can see where my thought process is on stuff. I jotted down a bunch of stuff that I wanted to touch on when it comes to bulking and cutting. I wanted to make sure I had everything together in my head before we dug into this. So I think first place we want to start is where the traditional bro bulking and cutting goes wrong. I think that most gym bros screw up with the hyper focus on the scale. I see the guys in the gym all the time. I hear bro tell me, hey man, I gained 50 pounds this off season. And I think I'm having a wonderful off season and I can't wait to see what I look like on stage. And as soon as I hear that, or when I cut down for next summer, I'm up 50 pounds on my bulk. I'm like, oh my God, 50 pounds, probably 5 of it's muscle, 45 of it is fat. And I think there's this ultra hyper focus on the scale where guys get more concerned about pushing the scale up than what they actually look like, what's actually going on with their body. And there's so many reasons why this goes sideways. Now, this is not to say that we don't want to push the scale up and get bigger. We know if you're going to compete as a super heavyweight bodybuilder, if you want to be an elite athlete, like let's say a football player, or if you want to be a wrestler or whatever your goal is, that you probably want to add muscle mass at some point. But getting fat is not adding muscle mass, and that is a huge differentiation, and I think where guys get themselves twisted up into knots. Their diet sucks. They use the off season as a reason. The bulk is a reason to just eat like shit and get fat and get sloppy. And the net result usually is not much muscle gained at the end of the day. And what happens when you put on a ton of weight? You have to take that weight off at some point. And you have to do a harsh diet to do so. And most of the time, the net muscle gained is really not any more than what you would have gained if you just kept yourself leaner. Now, that's not to say there's dudes that are permacutters that are scared to get fat. They're scared to push the food up. As soon as they start seeing the scale go up, there's the opposite of the guys that are the perma-bulkers. There's the permacutters too. As soon as they see the scale going up or they get a little soft, they panic and think they're getting fat. I get like that sometimes myself. I worry that I'm getting too fat. I've had that problem. I've been the perma-bulker. I've been the perma-cutter. I've been both. So neither one of them is great. But the issue with getting super fat, I would say most dudes are perma-bulkers. The large majority of dudes are just perma-bulkers. They get way too fat. They eat too much trash. And then you get into this situation where if you have to go on a contest prep and you need to lose 50, 60 pounds to get in shape, or if you just want to get in shape for the summer and get into single-digit body fat, and you got to lose 50 or 60 pounds, that fucking sucks. It's terrible to diet off that much. And most of the time, when you have to lose that much fat, you just end up losing muscle anyway. The net result sucks. Let's say you gain 10 pounds of muscle, you have to lose 50 pounds of fat. You're probably going to lose some muscle while you're dieting that off, even with PEDs. You're going to have a huge calorie deficit, and the bigger the calorie deficit is, the higher the risk you are of losing muscle. We know that to burn a pound of fat, we need to have a 3,500 calorie net negative energy balance for the week. If you want to burn a pound of fat, well, whatever, in a given period of time. I shouldn't say week, but 3,500 calories burned is a pound of fat. And when you push it up even further, let's say you need to lose 2 pounds of fat a week, that's 7,000 calories. That's 1,000 calories per day net negative energy balance. If you need to lose 3, you're at 1,500. Now, how much further are you going to push things? What I found generally is when a grown man, generally anything more than 2 to 3 pounds a week, you're at serious risk of losing muscle tissue, especially as you get deeper into the diet. It's really difficult to lose more than that. And you think about that huge calorie deficit. So if you've got to lose 50 pounds on a 16-week contest prep, what are we talking about? 3 pounds a week of fat loss, 1,500 calorie a day net negative energy balance. The guy that has to lose 1 pound a week and only run a 500 calorie deficit a day versus the dude that runs 1,500 calorie deficit per day, whether it's through cardio or eating less, who do you think is going to have the better look on stage? Who do you think is going to hang on to more muscle? Probably the dude that didn't have to starve himself and do an hour and a half cardio every day. That would be my guess. This year, on my contest prep, I think I only lost like 5 pounds. Something like that. I mean, I literally started off the same weight, jumped up about 10 pounds. Some of it was just water. But I think my net loss for my entire contest prep was something like 5 pounds. Easiest contest prep I've ever done. So much easier. So the harder the diet, the worse you're going to look on stage. And most of the time, when you have to lose a bunch of weight, there's going to be rapid fat gain after that. You're going to be so hungry from being in such a deep deficit that you're going to lose your mind post-show and eat like trash. I was still eating 3,500 calories a day on my medium days during my contest prep. I really wasn't hungry coming out of contest prep. I didn't have the urge to go binge eat like I have in the past when I've had to lose 50 or 60 pounds. Much better result. The other part of it is the bigger the deficit is, the more cardio you have to do, the more worn out you are, the more you're going to trash your metabolism coming out the other end. It's also bad for your health. As I mentioned before, you're setting yourself up for a situation where you're going to have rapid fat gain. And the dude that has to lose a ton of weight usually looks flat, stringy, and still a little bit soft on stage. So, but Paul, that's what I hear. This is the argument I hear from guys all the time. But Paul, big dudes eat a lot of food. You got to eat big to get big. That is true, but it's a progressive thing. The bigger you are, the more calories you're going to burn. I kept meticulous records of my diet, my training, my PEDs over the last 7 years as I worked my way up from a dad bod to a pro bodybuilder. And when I was 185 pounds, my BMR, roughly, was around 2,500 calories. That was where I was break even, where I wouldn't gain weight. At 230 pounds, a few years ago, it was 3,400 calories. At 250 pounds, it's 4,300 calories. Now, that's almost a 2,000 calorie a day difference. Now, lots changed. My PEDs are different. I have a lot more muscle. My activity levels are probably different. There's a bunch of other things that factor into that equation. You know, you think about it, a heavier bodybuilder is just going to expend more energy through training, period. You know, when you're pushing more weight, you're lifting more weight. You know, if you're benching or squatting 405 for 10 reps versus 135 for 10 reps, there's going to be more energy expended. When you're doing cardio at 250 pounds versus 185 pounds and you have more muscle tissue, more energy is going to be expended. Just sitting around during the day, more energy is going to be expended. As you become an advanced lifter and you're using more volume. I know everybody hates volume, but the more volume you do, the more energy you're going to expend, the more calories you're going to burn. Big dudes also, and there's no studies on this, in a normal person, they synthesize something like 3 to 5% of they can synthesize up to 3 to 5% of their body weight or muscle mass, I think it is, in glycogen. But I've seen the bigger dudes that are enhanced, that have carb cycled, seem to be able to synthesize more glycogen than that. I put it to test myself with my diets. I was doing up to 2,000 grams of carbs, 8,000 calories from carbohydrates on my high day during my contest prep this year, and I continue to get leaner. Now, if logic would reason, if I continued to get leaner, eating that many carbs, those carbs weren't stored as fat. I clearly didn't expend that many calories extra and energy during those days, so there's only one possible thing that happened to those carbohydrates. They were stored as glycogen, even though some people say that's impossible. But I've seen it over and over and over with large bodybuilders. So that's something you're not going to find in a scientific study. Just something from experience. As you increase PEDs, that's going to cause energy expenditure to go up. But here's the thing. Just like if you were lifting weights, if you go out, if the 185-pound Paul went out and ate at my maintenance calories, which is 4,300 now, if he tried to eat that at 185 pounds, it's almost a 2,000 calorie surplus. Now, what do you think is going to happen if I eat a 2,000 calorie surplus every day? If the 185-pound Paul tries to eat what the 250-pound Paul would for BMR, what do you think is going to happen? That Paul is probably just going to get fat. And if we think about it critically, they're really like things like fats, excess carbs beyond glycogen synthesis are really playing no role in building additional muscle tissue. Really, and there's such a minimal amount of muscle protein synthesis going on per day. You know, what is there? So don't quote me on the exact math here, but there's something like 440 grams in a pound. And let's just say a pound of muscle. Muscle is something like 75% water. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but there's ballpark. So 25% of its actual protein structures So what are we talking about? 110 grams of actual protein structures in a pound of muscle. And if you gained a pound of muscle a week, what is that, 25 grams, 26 grams of actual muscle protein synthesis that's happening per week with a couple grams a day? I mean, I know it doesn't exactly work out that way. There's amino acid pool, there's muscle protein, there's protein turnover and other things that are going on. I'm oversimplifying here, but you can see where I'm going with this. There really isn't a lot of demand for protein as far as actual calories that are needed to grow. Now, that's not to say that obviously the 250 pound Paul, if he ate like the 185 pound Paul, that would be a 2,000 calorie a day deficit. What do you think is going to happen to me if I eat a 2,000 calorie a day deficit? I'm going to lose some fat, but I don't have that much fat to lose. I'm probably 10% body fat. I'm probably just going to end up wasting away a lot of muscle tissue. So bigger body, bigger engine, more energy demand, more calories. You wouldn't go out and eat like a 250 pound bodybuilder when you're 185, just like you wouldn't try to bench 400 pounds when you're a guy that's 185 pounds and only can do 185. You're just going to get yourself hurt. It's not going to be productive. So you can see where I'm going with this. It's a progressive thing, just like all things with bodybuilding. You wouldn't go out and take 2.5 grams of PEDs when you're 185 pounds. You really don't have enough muscle tissue to even warrant that. Not enough androgen receptors. You're just going to have a bunch of side effects. You're going to make yourself sick. Just like if you overeat at that point, just like if you try to train like you were a 250 pound open bodybuilder, you're just going to get yourself hurt. So it's progressive. You work your way up. The perma-bulker curse, this is something that, what I've seen, and this is going to hurt some butts. Perma-bulkers, the guys that says, I'm going to take 2 or 3 years and just grow, they never end up actually growing. They don't. The net result is usually worse. And there's many reasons for this. This is just my theory. No science to back this up, but what I have seen, this process of pushing up and cutting back down and pushing back up and cutting back down, I'm not saying get fat, tends to result in better body composition and more muscle gain over the long term. So the reason why I don't think perma-bulkers end up better in the long run is the fatter you get, we know this from science, the proportionally more of the weight that you gain is actually going to be fat versus muscle tissue. The fatter you get, the worse estradiol conversion gets. Testosterone just doesn't work as well when you're fat. I don't need an AI when I'm below 10% body fat. If I'm above 15, I am a big old estrogen bomb. So you can be more aggressive with things like D-ball, say, or DECA, or using testosterone at higher doses when you're leaner and bigger. When you get fat, you're just going to be a big old estrogen bomb. And estrogen, as we know, can contribute to localized fat gain in certain parts of the body. It does all sorts of high estrogen, anyway, above reference range in men, causes all kinds of bad problems. A lot of guys, when they get fatter, they have metabolic disorder. They have worsened insulin sensitivity. Nutrient partitioning is going to be worse because of insulin sensitivity. A decline in insulin sensitivity. A lot of dudes don't realize it. They go get a liver scan done, and they find out that they have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, especially dudes that use PEDs when their body fat gets too high. And how well do you think you're going to grow if your liver is unhealthy? And the more fat that you have to lose, as we mentioned before, the more at risk you are of actually losing muscle tissue. So if you have to drop, 50 pounds of muscle and your net gain ends up being, 5 or 10 pounds if you have to lose 50 pounds of fat and your net gain ends up being 5 to 10 pounds of muscle, is it really worth gaining that 35 or 40 pounds or whatever amount of fat when you could have just put on 5 or 10 pounds and had a much easier diet? Probably looked better at the end. And dudes, trust me, I've done hard diets before. Having to lose more than 20 or 30 pounds of fat on a contest prep fucking sucks. You're miserable. So the proper way to bulk and cut. I know we say bulking and cutting is dead. I don't think it's dead. I think it needs to be done intelligently within certain parameters. We know contest prep, at least what I've seen with my clients, is that on a DEXA scan, somewhere between 6 to 7% body fat is stage lean. But 6 to 7% body fat, anybody that's been stage lean before, you know, as well as I do, that is not a good place to be for performing well in the gym, for gaining muscle. It is a shitty place to be. Your body does not want to grow when you're 6 to 7% body fat and a calorie deficit. And, you know, not sleeping, doing cardio, all that stuff. It's just not a good environment for gaining muscle. We all know that. You can't sustain that year round and get bigger. It just doesn't work. Max off-season body fat, like from what I've seen, like sort of the optimal range, depending on your genetics. Everybody's a little bit different. Genetically, there are some guys that can stay below 10% body fat. Genetically, I am not one of them. I'm a pretty lean guy. But I'd say for me, like somewhere in the optimal range is 10 to 12% in the off-season body fat. Much more than that, I feel like I'm getting too fluffy. But up to 15%, I think, is okay. And my rule of thumb is if you can't see the outline of your abs, you're too fat. It's just, you know, it's a simple way to look at it. And that is the ideal range for gaining muscle and performing well in the gym. If you're too lean, your joints are going to hurt. You're not going to have leverage for lifting weights. There is some benefit to having the extra weight, extra fat, a little bit of water on you. I'm not talking about being obese, but it does help in the gym with leverage and performance in joint, how your joints feel. Also, think about this. Getting super lean, like contest lean, gives you a big runway for being aggressive with food and putting on size in the off season. So let's say you're already 20% body fat and you want to push food up to grow. Where are you going to go? Are you going to bulk up to 30%? How the hell is that going to be when you cut down? What are you going to feel like going from 30 down to 6, having to lose 24% body fat? If you're a 200-pound guy, that's 50 pounds of fat you got to lose to get in stage shape. That's just not going to work. Not going to work well. Whereas if you go from 6, say, up to 15, that you gain 9%, or you have that runway to gain that 9%. I'm not saying that you need to gain that much, but let's just say if you got up to 10 and you gain 6% body fat and you're a 200-pound bodybuilder, you only have to lose 12 pounds of fat to get in stage shape. Plus you have a runway from that 6 to 12, gaining 6% body fat, even up to 15 to gain 9% body fat, and you're still pretty lean. 15% is still pretty lean. By most standards, the average American male is probably over 20% body fat, I would guess. So if you get super lean, you've got more runway to get to gain muscle and push your food up. We want to stay within that window, that 6 to 12 to 6 to 15% body fat. That is the perfect window for bodybuilding. For really anybody that wants a great physique. You're going to look better. You're going to feel better. You're going to get better performance. Your PEDs are going to work better because you're not going to have all the heavy estrogen conversion from aromatase being increased from being fatter. All this stuff. So what I've seen is if you repeat this process over and over, if you stay in that window, you cut down for your show, you push up, you stay in that window, what happens is as you do this process over and over and over again, your metabolism speeds up, you're able to eat more food, you get leaner each time as you diet down, Dieting down for shows is a lot easier. Believe me, with my BMR being over 4,000 calories, how much easier do you think it is to diet for a show than it is when it was when I was 2,300 or whatever it was, 2,500? If I do a 500 calorie drop right now to lose a pound of fat per week, I'm still eating almost 4,000 calories. Whereas when I was 185 pounds, a 500 calorie drop would put me down around 2,000. You're fucking starving at 2,000 calories as a man. Who do you think is going to have the easier time dieting? The bigger guy. So really, your bulk, I say bulk in quotes, goal, quote unquote, is to eat as much clean food as you possibly can, to continually pushing that up slowly. This is what I do with my clients. I slowly push that food up with a carb cycling diet without getting fat. And I'll talk about the macros. How you choose your macros matters a lot. A lot of guys screw up here too, where they eat the wrong macros. Cutting goal is to get as lean as we possibly can while still eating the most amount of food we can. And we set that up with the off season. That's another thing with incrementally pushing the food up without getting fat, is when you get your metabolism very high, you got a lot more runway when you get on contest prep to pull the fat off. And during contest prep, we want to set ourselves up in a position where we're not going to lose muscle on contest prep. We're going to still be able to eat a fair amount of food. And just think of it this way. If you, like for me, I only had to do 30 minutes of cardio a day this year. I only had to do basically like a 500 calorie a day deficit to get in shape for my show. Who do you think is going to have a better look on their physique? The guy that's doing a 500 calorie deficit in 30 minutes of cardio, or the dude that has to do 90 minutes of cardio and a 1,500 calorie a day deficit or 1,000 calorie a day deficit? I think the guy that's eating more food and doing less cardio is probably going to look better on stage because he doesn't have as much fat to lose. He's going to be able to hang on to more muscle. He's not going to be as worn out. He's not going to be as flat on stage. He's not going to look as stringy. I think that guy is going to look the best. You can see it here. This is, just some evidence that, it's humble brag, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But this was 3 years of progress of me incrementally pushing up my food without getting fat. You can see through these three pictures. This first picture that I have up here is at the end of contest. I was 185 pounds. I had dieted down from like 260. I was too fat. And I ended up losing a bunch of muscle. The diet sucked. I looked stringy. I looked small on stage. Next show, things went a little better. I pushed my food up. Ended up at 233 on stage. I only lost like 15 pounds this time, or 20 pounds. I don't remember what it was. That last picture, the last picture here, that's my off season. That's what I looked like in the off season. I was almost as lean in my off season as I was at 262 pounds as I was at 233. Only a couple % difference in fat. You can see here, that's what happens if you keep yourself leaner. You push up the food incrementally, along with the PEDs and other things that are in that equation. You can see what the result is. So, as I mentioned before, this is an area that drives me nuts with bros, is they choose all the fucking wrong macros. And this is another reason why dudes get fat in the off season. It's not just calories, it's what your body does with those calories, how those nutrients are partitioned, those macronutrients are partitioned. So protein, it's really hard to get fucking fat on protein. I've never seen anybody, and this is why, carnivore diets are so easy and everybody usually ends up getting in shape. It's pretty hard to overeat protein. Protein, the process that it has to go through to get converted into glucose, gluconeogenesis, is just it's not an efficient process of getting glucose out of a protein structure. So you can pretty much eat however much protein you want from really the upper limit's appetite and not get fat. If you just went on a strict protein only diet, you're going to get leaner. It's just what I've seen. You need enough EFAs to support health, vitamin transport, cellular health, all that stuff. They're called essential fatty acids for a reason. Your body does not make them on their own, so you need some. Same thing with proteins, essential amino acids. Your body does not make them on your own, so you need those through your diets. Limited saturated fats. I don't know why there's this cult of dudes that just want to eat butter and tallow and stupid saturated fat. It's just dumb. They really contribute nothing to muscle growth. They're just energy at the end of the day. Energy, and not only are they just energy, saturated fats either get utilized, for the most part, there's some intricacies here, but as a general rule, for the most part, they either get utilized as energy or stored as fat. They're already prepackaged, ready to go to be stored as fat. Now, if you're not eating carbohydrates, certainly you can use them as a fuel source, but if you're eating any carbohydrates at all, you want to keep your saturated fats to a minimum. Not only that, if you are a PED user, you're already going to have lipid skewing, and eating saturated fats on top of it's just a recipe to have cardiovascular disease. Not a smart choice, eating a diet high in saturated fat when you're a bodybuilder. And generally what I've seen is dudes that eat high-fat diets never get lean. Really. They never get like shredded. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but almost never do I see dudes, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why most open-class bodybuilders don't eat diets high in saturated fats. Now, like I said, you do need some EFAs, from fish and nuts and things like that. Carbs are the ideal fuel, whether you like it or not. There's tons of studies that show it for muscle, performance in the gym and for growing muscle. And there does seem to be, and there's no studies on this. You're not going to find a study on this anywhere. There does seem to be some ability as you get bigger to force glycogen synthesis and increase muscle fullness and roundness through using things such as insulin and eating high carb diets with carb cycling. There does seem to be some sort of supercompensation effect that you can force. I know they say that it's something like 3% of muscle is actual glycogen, and that may be the case for normal people, but for enhanced people, guys that look at Mila Sarchev's guys, anybody who's run insulin, you know what I'm talking about. There's no study that's going to show that. There is an increased level of glycogen synthesis, as I talked about earlier. It is the best fuel source for lifting, hands down. Just don't eat carbs for a couple of days and let me know how your performance in the gym goes. It goes down. Let me know how your pumps go after you don't eat carbs for a couple of days. Goes down. Let me know what your fullness looks like after you don't eat carbs for a couple of days. It goes down. So if you want to be a bodybuilder, you need to eat carbs. And how carbs are utilized by the body is different than fats. They don't get, certainly carbs can be turned into fat, but they have to be metabolized into lipids by the liver first, and then gets stored as fat. So you need to, your body will use glucose as fuel first, then as glycogen for glycogen synthesis and storage in the liver and muscles, and then third, in a metabolically healthy person, then it gets turned into lipids and stored as fat. It's a multi-step process. If you're healthy, if you're training properly, if your diet's clean, it's not saying that it's impossible to get fat eating carbs, but the way your body partitions those nutrients, it is certainly more difficult than doing a high-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. PEDs change the equation too. There's no studies on this. None. Really. But not at the doses that we use in bodybuilding. There's studies on guys using a couple hundred milligrams, but there's not studies on guys using grams of gear. Open class bodybuilders that are 250 pounds using insulin with growth hormone and multiple anabolics on top of it with carb cycling diets and whatever training that you're using, volume training you're using in the gym. There's no studies, not that I know of. All we have is anecdote and practical experience to go on. And what I've seen over and over and over and over and over again, if you keep your diet low in fat, you run this cycle back and forth of bulking and cutting between those parameters and not getting fat between the 6 to 12 to 15% body fat range. If you repeat that over and over and over again with PEDs in the equation, you just get leaner and bigger. You see my pictures. Fuck, I'm 50 years old. You know, imagine if I did that shit when I was in my 20s, what I would have looked like. And I've seen it over and over and over and over again with my clients. Now, genetics do play a factor in it. Some people respond better to the PEDs. Some people respond better to the diet. Some people have shit metabolisms. They just got dealt a short hand. Now, everybody I've worked with, I've been able to increase metabolism to a certain degree. Everybody's different, but you know, most people are in the middle somewhere. There are outliers on both ends. So the person that has no response to training, drugs, PEDs, diet, and then there's the guy on the other end that's the hyper responder, and then most people are in the middle somewhere. You know, PEDs completely change the equation as we talk about, but, you know, increased muscle protein synthesis. Your body's going to better utilize the amino acids and proteins that you're eating, better nutrient partitioning, better insulin sensitivity. Insulin can force glycogen synthesis, increased CNS stimulation, increased metabolism as a result from androgens. How we modulate estrogen affects fat gain and fat distribution in the body. You know, HGH increases fat burning and lipolysis, inhibits fat gain. There's, you know, all kinds of, you know, parts that PEDs play in this equation that change everything up and just makes everything completely different. So that you know, you're not going to find that in a study anyway. So anywhere, so that changes how the bulking and cutting. So a lot of these things that we see are on natties or guys that are running basically TRT or TRT plus in these studies. So you're not going to find a study on that. Now, with that said, the science that we do know, the fatter you get, the less efficient your body is going to be at gaining muscle. We do know that, and I've just seen that in practicality too. So you sort of have to take science in one hand, anecdote and practical experience in the other hand, and marry them together. Now, there are certain mechanisms that are just absolute. We know that those mechanisms are absolute. They don't change. There are some things that we don't know how they work, especially when PEDs are in the equation. But we have general ideas. And I will say this, getting fat, in summary, is never a benefit for bodybuilding or for better body composition, for muscle growth. Now, if you want to be a strong man, and you don't give a fuck, if you want to be an offensive lineman, if you want to be a power lifter, sure, go for it. Get huge as possible. Put on that fat. Now, you can gain muscle and get fat. That absolutely happens. You see a big guy like Eddie Hall, and I got over 400 pounds, and he diets down. He's still 350. Clearly, he put on a lot of muscle. Now, is that the look that you want for bodybuilding? Probably not. You know, same thing with Hathor. You know, guy got up over 400 pounds, dieted down, still over 300. Massive human beings. You'll see it with old power lifters. They'll diet down, but not really the ideal look for bodybuilding. So we sort of have to walk this line. We want to walk up to the line, be aggressive as we can, not get super fat, stay in that range, and you're going to have the best results as a bodybuilder. All right, folks, that's all I got on this one for you. A reminder of that sale. Go pick up the e-course if you want to grab it while it's still on the Black Friday sale, 30% off. Let me know what you think about bulking and cutting, the science on it, what your practical experience is with it in the comments section below. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for your support. Take care. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.